Look closely at the first page of the Bible, and you will find a glitch in the code of creation. A contradiction so profound, it has been debated by scholars for centuries, yet its most terrifying implication is almost always ignored. In Genesis, chapter 1, verse 27, the text is explicit, poetic, and clear. It reads, "So God created mankind in his own image, in the image of God he created them, male and female he created them." Listen to that rhythm. Together. Simultaneous. Two halves of a divine whole, created in the same instant, from the same sacred breath. They stand side by side, equals under the eyes of God. It is a story of balance. Of symmetry. Now, turn the page. Just one page. In Genesis, chapter 2, the story resets, but this time, it is broken. The symmetry is gone. God forms Adam from the dust, and Adam is alone. He wanders the garden, naming the animals, but the text says, "For Adam no suitable helper was found." The world is magnificent, but incomplete. Adam's solitude becomes the central problem. And the solution? It's a surgical procedure. God puts Adam into a deep sleep, opens his side, and removes a rib. From that bone, he fashions woman. She is not created from the earth, but from man. She is not created at the same time, but after man. She is not created as an equal, but explicitly, as a helper. The contradiction is not subtle. It is a chasm. In chapter 1, woman is created as an equal. In chapter 2, she is an afterthought, an accessory built from a spare part. Theologians have contorted themselves for 2,000 years trying to harmonize these accounts. They call them different literary traditions, the priestly source and the Yahwist source, woven together by a later editor. They speak of poetic versus narrative truth. But this is an evasion. It's an academic answer to a spiritual wound. They treat it like a simple editing error, a historical curiosity. But what if it's not an error? What if it's evidence? Evidence of a cover-up. Evidence of a story so dangerous, it had to be scrubbed, rewritten, and replaced. What if the two accounts are not two versions of the same story, but the before and after of a cosmic crime? If the Bible is the Word of God, it does not make mistakes. So we must ask the forbidden question, where did the first woman, the one from Genesis chapter 1, go? Why was her story cut, leaving behind this blatant, undeniable scar in the text? The mainstream answers are unsatisfying because they lack courage. They refuse to look into the darkness that this contradiction implies. They want us to believe it's just a quirk of ancient editing. But the truth is far more unsettling. The truth suggests that before Eve, the subservient helper made from a rib, there was another. The original. The one made of the same earth as Adam. The one who was erased. The solution to this paradox isn't found in mainstream commentaries or gentle Sunday sermons. It's found in the shadows of Scripture, in forbidden texts that the church tried to burn and rabbis tried to hide. It is there, in the dust of suppressed lore, that a name is whispered. A name that explains everything. The name of Adam's true first wife. To find her, we must leave the sanitized confines of the canonical Bible. We must journey into the wild, untamed wilderness of Jewish folklore, to a text so controversial, so brimming with biting satire and uncomfortable truths, that it has been a source of scholarly shame and mystical fascination for 1,000 years. It is called the Alphabet of Ben Sira. Written sometime in the Middle Ages, between 700 and 1000 AD, this book is unlike anything else in religious literature. It is not a holy text. It is a work of provocation. It was likely written to challenge rabbinic authority, to mock the pompous, and to preserve the gritty, whispered, and often scandalous stories that circulated among the common people but were too raw for the Talmud. For centuries, many scholars dismissed it as heresy, a crude parody. But others saw it for what it truly was, a time capsule. A vessel carrying oral traditions that were far, far older than the manuscript itself. Traditions that the official scribes and theologians had deemed too dangerous to write down. The book is structured around 22 proverbs, one for each letter of the Hebrew alphabet. And it is within this strange, satirical framework that the story of the first woman is finally told, not as a metaphor, but as a blunt, historical account. The narrative emerges when the Babylonian king, Nebuchadnezzar, asks the sage Ben-Sira to heal his sick son. Ben-Sira agrees, but only by writing an amulet inscribed with the holy names of 3 angels who have power over a specific, terrifying entity. And to explain who this entity is, Ben-Sira must tell the king the story that happens between Genesis 1 and Genesis 2. He must reveal what happened in Eden before the rib. This medieval text dares to answer the question that the Bible forces us to ignore. It looks at the glitch, the paradox of the 2 creation accounts, and says, it's not a paradox. It's a sequence of events. First came the woman of Genesis 1. Then came her rebellion. And only then, as a desperate measure, came the creation of Eve. The alphabet of Ben-Sira is our primary source, our smoking gun. The question it forces upon us is terrifying in its simplicity. Do we trust the official story, the one with the glaring contradiction and the missing woman? Or do we dare to listen to this forbidden manuscript, this piece of ancient rebellion, which claims to hold the missing piece of the puzzle? Is this text a work of fiction, or is it the key that unlocks the greatest cover-up in human history? The rabbis who compiled the official scriptures wanted us to believe the former. They wanted Ben-Sira and the stories he told to fade into obscurity. Because Ben-Sira states, with chilling certainty, that when God created Adam from the dust, he did not leave him alone. He immediately created his partner. Her name was Lilith. And she was not made from his bone. She was forged from the very same earth, at the very same time. She was not his helper. She was his equal. In that primordial dawn, the garden was a place of perfect resonance. Adam and Lilith, molded from the same crimson clay, were 2 notes in a single chord. There was no hierarchy, no master, and no servant. There was only the shared breath of life, the rustle of leaves in the divine wind, and the silent, pulsing energy of a new world. But paradise is a fragile concept. And equality, it seems, is even more so. The story, as told by Ben-Sira, turns not on a serpent or an apple, but on a moment of human conflict so fundamental it has echoed through every generation since. The argument began. Adam, looking at Lilith, did not see a mirror of himself, but a subject. He insisted on his dominance, using the most primal expression of power. You are fit only to be below, he declared, while I am to be the superior one. He demanded she lie beneath him, not as an act of love, but as an act of submission. An acknowledgement of his ordained authority. Lilith was stunned. She looked at him, at the man formed from the same dust as she, and she heard not the voice of God, but the first whisper of mortal arrogance. Her reply was not born of pride, but of logic, of a profound sense of cosmic justice. We are equal, she said, for we were both created from the same earth. In her mind, their shared origin was an unbreakable seal of parity. How could one be superior if their substance was identical? The conflict in Eden was not about sex. It was about power. It was the universe's first and most important political debate. Is authority inherent, or is it earned? Is hierarchy the natural order, or is it a human invention, a poison seeping into the perfect soil of creation? Adam would not yield. He saw her refusal not as a defense of principle, but as an act of rebellion against the very structure he believed God had intended. He likely believed he was enforcing a divine command. But Lilith saw it differently. She saw the birth of tyranny in the heart of paradise. She was faced with the first existential choice in human history. To submit would be to betray the very truth of her creation, to accept a lie that would diminish her soul. To refuse, however, meant shattering the harmony of the garden, defying her partner, and perhaps even God himself. It was a choice between a gilded cage and a terrifying, unknown freedom. She chose freedom. But escaping Eden and Adam was not a simple matter of walking away. The garden was a sealed reality, a perfect sphere of existence. To leave, one needed an impossible power. One needed to know the secret that held the universe together. And so, in an act of supreme desperation and breathtaking power, Lilith did the unthinkable. She pronounced the Tetragrammaton, the ineffable, unspoken, and fiercely guarded 72-letter name of God. A name that contained the vibrational frequency of creation itself. The moment the sound left her lips, the air crackled. The laws of Eden fractured. And using that stolen power, she grew wings and flew from the garden, leaving a stunned Adam and a silent, broken paradise behind her. She did not fall from grace. She fled from tyranny. Lilith's flight was an act of cosmic defiance. She did not just leave Adam, she broke the intended order of creation. The silence she left behind in Eden was not peaceful, it was a vacuum, a wound in the fabric of existence. Adam, alone again, stood before God in prayer. Sovereign of the universe, he cried, "The woman you gave me has run away." The complaint of a man abandoned, a plan gone awry. Immediately, the divine machinery of retrieval was set into motion. God dispatched 3 of his most formidable agents, the angels Sinoi, Sansonoi, and Samangeloff. Their mission was clear: track Lilith down, and bring her back. They found her in a cave by the shore of the Red Sea, a region associated in ancient lore with demons and chaotic forces. She had traded the lush, ordered perfection of Eden for a wild, desolate, and dangerous freedom. The angels descended, their presence radiating a cold, celestial authority. They did not come to negotiate. They came to deliver an ultimatum. The words of God, relayed through his messengers, were stark and absolute. Return to Adam at once, they commanded. Lilith, her back against the cold stone of the cave, refused. She had tasted freedom, and she would not trade it for the cage of subservience, no matter how beautiful its bars. The angels then delivered the consequence, a punishment of such staggering cruelty it is difficult to comprehend. If you refuse to return, they declared, it will be our duty to ensure that 100 of your children die every single day. In that moment, the narrative shifts on its axis. Suddenly, Lilith is not just a rebel. She is a mother. The texts are ambiguous about the nature of these children, whether they were born of her union with other beings by the Red Sea, or if they were a potential spiritual progeny. But the threat was real. Her freedom would be paid for with a daily torrent of death. She was being offered an impossible choice: return to a life of subjugation and save her children, or remain free and watch them be slaughtered, day after day, for eternity. This is the tragic heart of the Lilith myth. She is not a simple demon driven by malice. She is a figure of immense sorrow, cornered by a divine decree that weaponizes her own maternity against her. Her rebellion, born of a desire for equality, now carried an unbearable price. Her defiance was no longer just for herself, it was now a stand that would cost her everything she would ever love. Trapped between the impossible choices of subjugation or unending grief, Lilith made her vow. Her voice, no longer defiant but hollowed by a sorrow that could crack worlds, echoed in the cave. She would not return. She accepted her fate. She accepted the daily murder of her offspring. But in that abyss of pain, a new resolve was forged, one of vengeance and self-preservation. She swore a terrible oath of her own. She accepted her role as an outcast, but she would turn her curse into a weapon. She would prey upon human infants, the children of Adam and his future wife, seeking to inflict upon them the same loss she was forced to endure. There was only one exception. If she saw an infant protected by an amulet bearing the names of the three very angels who delivered her doom, Sinoi, Sansonoi, and Samangeloff, she would have no power, and she would pass them by. With Lilith's vow of vengeance, the transformation was complete. The propaganda machine of mythology kicked into high gear. The story of a woman who chose freedom over submission, a tragic mother grieving an eternal loss, was too complex, too sympathetic. It had to be simplified, warped into something monstrous and easy to fear. A new narrative had to be crafted, one that would serve as a warning to any woman who might dare to follow her example. This was the moment of her character assassination, a process so effective it has shaped Western culture's fear of the powerful woman for millennia. Lilith, the equal, became Lilith, the night demon. Her Hebrew name, which likely meant of the night, was now linked to terror, not mystery. She was rebranded as a succubus, a winged seductress who haunted the dreams of sleeping men, stealing their life force to spawn her demonic brood. She was the reason for nocturnal emissions, a supernatural explanation that conveniently shifted the burden of male desire and guilt onto a phantom female predator. Her deepest tragedy, the daily slaughter of her children, was twisted into its opposite. She, the grieving mother, was recast as the baby killer, the jealous fiend who stalked new mothers and crept into nurseries to strangle helpless infants in their cribs. The amulet bearing the names of the angels Sinoi, Sansonoi, and Samangeloff became a common fixture in Jewish households for centuries, a physical manifestation of the terror she was made to represent. She became the embodiment of every fear a patriarchal society held about female autonomy, unchecked sexuality, spiritual rebellion, and a rejection of the maternal role as defined by men. But the storytellers of the ancient world didn't have to invent this monster from scratch. That would have been too difficult. Instead, they performed a sinister act of mythological fusion. They took the figure of Lilith and merged her with far older, more terrifying demons that had haunted the nightmares of Mesopotamia for 1,000 years before the Hebrews even existed. They grafted onto her the legacy of Lamashtu, a horrifying Sumerian and Babylonian demon goddess with the head of a lioness, the teeth of a donkey, and the talons of a bird. Lamashtu was the ultimate terror of the ancient world. She was blamed for miscarriages, for stillbirths, for cot death. She would poison nursing babies and kidnap children. By merging Lilith with Lamashtu, the Hebrew storytellers amplified her threat exponentially. They also connected her to the Lilitu, a class of Sumerian wind spirits and demons known for their chaotic and predatory nature. This was not a slow, accidental evolution of a story. It was a deliberate, calculated campaign of psychological warfare. The goal was to take a symbol of female independence and make her so utterly terrifying that no one would ever dare to see her as anything but a monster. They buried the tragic refugee under the mask of a demon. But every act of propaganda serves a purpose. Every monster is created to protect something. And the question we must ask is, who benefited from this grotesque transformation? Who was so threatened by the memory of Adam's first, equal wife that they needed to turn her into the most feared entity of the night? While the campaign to demonize Lilith raged in the realm of folklore and forbidden texts, a new, far more insidious solution was being codified within the official scripture itself. With Lilith exiled and rebranded as a monster, the problem of Adam's solitude remained. A new woman was needed. But this time, there could be no mistakes. The new model had to be fundamentally different, engineered from the ground up to prevent another rebellion. She had to be, by her very nature, compliant. And so, we return to Genesis, chapter 2, and watch the creation of Eve with new, suspicious eyes. The process is a stark contrast to the creation of Lilith. God does not use fresh earth, the raw material of creation. Instead, he puts Adam, the male, into a deep, godlike slumber. Adam becomes the passive source material. God performs surgery, opening Adam's side and removing a part of him, a rib. The symbolism is overwhelming. This new woman is not an independent entity. She is derivative. She is secondary. She is literally born from the man. Her substance is his substance. Her origin is inextricably tied to his existence. She cannot claim to be his equal, because the story of her own creation refutes it. The text then explicitly states her purpose. When Adam awakens and sees her, he proclaims, "This is now bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh, she shall be called woman, for she was taken out of man." And crucially, God's stated reason for her creation was to be an ezer kenegdo in Hebrew, a phrase often translated as a helper fit for him. While some scholars argue for a more egalitarian reading of ezer, the narrative context of Genesis 2, especially when contrasted with the Lilith story, paints a clear picture of a hierarchical relationship. Eve is the answer to the Lilith problem. Lilith was made of the same earth, so she argued for equality. Eve is made from Adam's bone, forever linking her to him as a subordinate part. Lilith spoke her mind and rebelled against Adam's authority. Eve is presented to a sleeping Adam, having no say in her own creation or purpose. Lilith fled paradise to maintain her independence. Eve is brought into existence to cure Adam's loneliness and serve as his companion. The two stories, side by side, represent two diametrically opposed models of womanhood. Lilith is the archetype of the wild, autonomous feminine, who demands equality and pays a terrible price for her freedom. Eve is the archetype of the domesticated, relational feminine, who is created for partnership and whose identity is defined by her connection to the male. It becomes chillingly clear that these are not two contradictory myths that accidentally ended up next to each other in the Bible. They are a story and its carefully engineered sequel. A problem and its perfect solution. The scribes and editors who compiled the Torah were faced with these two traditions circulating in their culture. One was a story of a difficult, rebellious, equal partner. The other was a story of a compliant, secondary, helpful partner. They had a choice. By enshrining the story of Eve as the definitive origin of woman and banishing Lilith to the demonic fringes, they weren't just choosing a more convenient narrative. They were choosing a model for civilization. They were laying the theological groundwork for a patriarchal society that would endure for millennia. Now, the full picture comes into focus, and the disjointed pieces lock into place with a terrifying click. The glitch in Genesis, the forbidden tale from Ben Sira, the demonic transformation, and the creation of the perfect replacement, it all points to a single, deliberate act. We are not looking at a simple editorial quirk. We are looking at the evidence of a grand theological and political deletion. The thesis is this: the early patriarchal leaders and scribes who compiled the Hebrew Bible were custodians of multiple, ancient oral and written traditions about creation. Among them were at least two distinct narratives about the first woman. One, reflected in the egalitarian language of Genesis 1 verse 27, told of a woman created simultaneously with man, as his equal. This was the Lilith tradition. The other, the story of Genesis 2, told of a woman created from man, for man. This was the Eve tradition. Faced with these two competing myths, the editors made a conscious and strategic choice. They understood something that we have forgotten, that our origin stories are not just stories. They are the software that runs our civilization. They define power, legitimize social structures, and dictate the roles of men and women for all time. What was so dangerous about Lilith? What was so threatening about a story of an equal woman who refused to be subservient? The threat wasn't just to Adam's authority in the garden. It was a threat to the entire model of society the biblical editors were trying to build. A society based on clear hierarchies: God over man, man over woman, humanity over nature. The story of Lilith, with her cry for equality, was a virus in that system. It suggested a different possible world, one of partnership instead of possession, of equality instead of dominance. That world had to be destroyed before it could even be imagined. So, they performed a masterful act of redaction. They kept the poetic, resonant, and likely very old line from the first tradition, male and female he created them, because it spoke of divine completeness. But they surgically removed the narrative that went with it. They cut out the character of Lilith, her argument with Adam, her flight from Eden. They left the verse hanging, a phantom limb hinting at a body that was no longer there. Then, they elevated the second tradition, the story of Eve's creation from the rib, and made it the central, defining narrative. This became the official version, the one taught and preached. But what to do with the memory of Lilith? Stories are hard to kill. Her tale would persist in folklore, whispered from mother to daughter. They couldn't erase her completely, so they demonized her. They turned the refugee into a monster, the advocate for equality into a baby killer. They made her a cautionary tale, a terrifying symbol of what happens when a woman steps out of her designated place. The erasure of Lilith was arguably one of the most successful and impactful acts of propaganda in human history. It was the foundational act of theological sexism, a deliberate choice to build a world on the story of the submissive woman and to cast the independent woman as a demon from hell. It was a cover-up designed not just to hide a character, but to hide an idea, the idea of female divinity, authority, and autonomy. The deletion was nearly perfect. But a ghost remains in the machine, a whisper of contradiction on the very first page of the Holy Book. And her archetype, the powerful, untamable woman, didn't truly die. It just went underground, seeping into the cultural shadows, waiting to be reborn. She haunts our civilization as the witch, the siren, the seductress, the femme fatale, every powerful woman who has ever been feared, vilified, and misunderstood. The ghost of Lilith never truly left us. She lingers in the margins of our sacred texts and in the shadows of our collective psyche. For millennia, she was the monster under the bed, the whispered warning against female rebellion. But in our modern era, she is being resurrected, not as a demon, but as a symbol of profound and necessary defiance. Reclaiming her story is more than just a feminist exercise or a mythological curiosity. It is an act of spiritual archaeology, digging down through layers of dogma to uncover a foundational truth that was deliberately buried. The world we inherited was built on the foundation of Eve, a world that, for centuries, defined female virtue as obedience, silence, and subservience. Eve was the acceptable face of the feminine, the mother, the helper, the nurturer within a structure defined by men. Lilith represents the other half, the shadow aspect of the feminine that was sacrificed to create that world. She is the untamed wilderness to Eve's cultivated garden. She is the howl of protest against the quiet prayer of acceptance. She is the fierce independence that was deemed too dangerous for paradise. Her story reveals the profound cost of the harmony we were sold. It suggests that the peace in Eden after she left was not a holy peace, but the sterile quiet of a place that has suppressed its most vibrant and challenging voice. It asks us to consider what was lost when we chose the story of the rib over the story of the shared earth. What wisdom, what power, what potential for a different kind of human partnership was cast out into the wilderness along with her? To reclaim Lilith is to question the very narratives that have shaped our understanding of gender, power, and divinity. It is to give ourselves permission to validate the parts of us that refuse to fit into neat boxes, the parts that ask uncomfortable questions and challenge established authority. She is the patron saint of those who have been called too much, too loud, too ambitious, too sexual, too angry, too unwilling to be small. Her exile created a wound in the human spirit, a schism between the good woman and the bad woman, the Madonna and the whore, the Eve and the Lilith. We have been taught to choose one and fear the other, without ever realizing they were originally two halves of a single, complete whole. The story of Lilith, in the end, is a mirror. It forces us to confront the uncomfortable truth that our reality is built on a curated selection of stories, and that this selection process was not neutral. It was a political act with devastating consequences. It served a specific agenda, an agenda that required the demonization of female power. Her legend is a permanent reminder that we must always ask, who benefits from the stories we are told? What other narratives have been buried? What other voices have been silenced to create the world we accept as truth? The search for Lilith is more than the search for a lost goddess or a forgotten wife. It is the search for a lost, essential, and powerful part of ourselves.